So what you'll learn today, we're going to talk about credit reporting arrangements by banks during COVID, and a lot of you had questions about that, and a lot of you even wanted to know about the future and what's going to happen after COVID, which is interesting. So the second thing, how to decipher typical information contained in a credit report. Third thing, how missed payments are recorded. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the treatment of hardship. So anything to add to that?
No. So we'll start with
what is credit reporting?
Which I think you'd like to know about too. So
yeah.
Good. So this slide is actually pulled from the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and you can find it yourself. But I think it gives a really good overview as to what is credit reporting. So basically, you give information, personal information, to your credit provider, who gives that credit information to a credit reporting body, and they then produce from that your credit report and or your credit score. The one thing that I wanted to say is that credit is very broadly defined. So it's not just about loans, regulated loans or personal loans. It can be much broader than that. It's really about a deferral of payment for a period of time. So that's why utilities and telecommunications providers are also included. And that was one of the questions. And and of course, like we said before, these are national laws, so they apply consistently across the states and territories. Yeah, so move on.
Move on to the next slide.
Move on.
Yeah. Got some good diagrams on here, don't we?
Yes, but they're from the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. So this is another one as to the credit reporting system. So what do credit reporting bodies do with that information that you gave to the credit provider and that they gave to the credit reporting bodies? So they may give your credit reporting information to a specific third-party insurer, a third party like a mortgage insurer, or they may give it to a credit provider, who then can put that information together with other information that you might have given them to give again to a mortgage third party or credit provider. That's just so that they can work out, it's just part of the information that they use to assess whether they should give you credit or not. I wanted to explain that there's actually three major credit reporting bodies. There's Equifax, Illion, and Experian. And one of the questions that was asked of me is the information in those credit reporting bodies consistent? So will you get the same information regardless of who you go to?
That's a good question, yeah.
So it should, ideally it should be consistent in this way. So if, say, a bank gives information to each of those credit reporting bodies, then the information that should be on your credit report should be consistent. So if you've had a default with Bank A, it should be in all of the three credit reporting bodies. However, not all lenders give information to each credit reporting body. So if Bank A or Lender A only gives information to two credit reporting bodies, there won't be information in the third about that lender.
Okay.
The way in which they at least get consistency across if a lender reports to each body is that there's something called the Principles of Reciprocity and Data Exchange Code that regulates the sharing of information both between the credit reporting bodies and the credit providers, the lenders. So that's why there might be information that's not consistent. And it's also that they might slightly show that information to you differently. Okay. And the other thing is, one of the questions that was asked, well, how do you find out which credit provider reports to which agency? Is there a list? Not that I know of, but if anyone knows if there's a list, please let us know.
Yeah.
But I think that would be quite useful to know. So I always say, if you're going to get a credit report, you probably should go to all three of them and get your report.
Yeah.
But I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, so I've got some more questions about that, but I'll ask you later.
Oh, good on you.
I guess the first thing I want to ask though is what information is on a credit report?
Okay, so, well, that's great because that's the next slide. Well, the first thing that's on your credit report is, and can be on your credit report, is identifying information. And that list there is basically all that can be on there. So they were very careful to not make information on there that might be discriminatory or, but from that information they can glean a lot of, you know, that's very useful when assessing credit. So even things like where your address might be, depending on what suburb it's in, may affect your ability to get credit, how often you've moved. So usually it can contain the 2 previous known addresses as well. And so that sort of information does affect your ability to obtain credit. Then what I did, what I really did is I looked at a credit report, and I have actually tried to put on this whole presentation what a credit report would look like, what it looks like from a particular credit reporting body. And that credit reporting body is the one that I pulled is one that was given to me from a financial counsellor that they had got from Equifax. So on the summary page, there's this is what's in your credit report: consumer credit information, commercial credit, and other. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those areas separately. So after you get your identifying information, this is what's on the next page.
Right, okay.
But that means that if you went to one of the other credit reporting bodies, it might be presented differently.
Okay.
And that somebody asked me in particular about actually maybe we won't talk about that because it was talking about a name of a company, but somebody did ask me about a particular company and asked what information was reported there. All I can really say is that they were part of the Alien Group, which is one of the other credit reporting bodies. So like I said, they can only report certain information on those credit reports, but it's not necessarily consistent between all 3 agencies.
Cool.
All right. So the first thing, like when we went back to that summary page, I'm using my hands everywhere. When we went back to that summary page, you saw that consumer credit inquiry. So each time you make an application for credit, it goes onto your credit report. And you can see what they can list there. One of the questions that they was asked is, if you apply for a loan, does the lender have to tell you that they're going to list an inquiry? Not in the way that you think, that they're not going to say, well, we're going to list an inquiry. What they ask you to do is sign or give authority under the Privacy Act.
Yeah.
And by giving that authority, it allows them to access your credit report, which means that the inquiry will go on there. The problem with that information is taken into account when assessing credit. So if you have lots of applications for credit, or you have applications to credit to more third-tier lenders, like not banks, not building societies, but those small amount lenders, payday lenders, then it actually does affect your ability to obtain credit.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
I don't really like how this slide is going. What this slide says. So I'm gonna slide past.
You're gonna go past this, okay?
Except to say, generally, what information when we would talk about consumer credit liability information, generally what they will include is what accounts you have, the defaults you have, and publicly available information.
Okay.
So, but we'll talk in relation to each account that you have open. This is the way it looks on an Equifax credit report. So you'll get the financial account, the bank, the name of the account, because that might be important because it might be held in joint names, the account type, the account number, and if you go down, you can see the account term type, the term loan, and what we mean by that.
And what is that big number you've got on the screen there under the repayment history information?
I'm going to go to that. I'm going to go to that in a minute.
Okay.
So for every liability that you have, you'll have that first column in there.
Okay.
Okay. Some of them may not be relevant, so it might not be relevant to a utilities account, or you know, because the utilities account won't be secured generally; it'll be unsecured.
Sure.
But it should say up the top in the account type that it's an electricity account or utilities account or personal loan account, a credit card account, and it will talk about the close date and the reopen date.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the right-hand side is your repayment history information, and that is only in relation to, that information is only there for a specific types of lending.
Okay.
So not all lending have repayment history information.
Okay.
And repayment history information is really talking about missed payments. So they're different to defaults, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. It's just if you've fallen behind on repayments, they only relate to regulated credit.
Okay.
So regulated credit is credit that's under the National Consumer Credit Code. So it doesn't relate to utility accounts or anything that's not regulated credit. And that's because repayment history information has, those loans have responsible lending obligations embedded in legislation, and that's why they were able to list that information.
Right, okay.
Now, one of the questions that I was asked before I picked that, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sort of. Or, please ask me any questions. I cannot, probably some of those questions.
Yeah, we've got a few questions coming
already.
in.
Already. Oh my God. Is there any ones that relate directly to this slide? Ellen, just check.
Let me check. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so maybe Georgina, your question is very lengthy. So
we can answer that at the end.
Yeah, we might be able to answer that at the end. So with repayment history information, if you have a look, can we just slip over to the next slide? So each repayment history information is recorded for the previous 2 years. So if you then slip back to the other slide, go back. So if you have a look at where it says 2018, it starts in March of 2018 and ends in April of 2020. So there's 2 years of history there. Your missed payments can be recorded from 0 to 7. I'm assuming that after you've missed 7 payments, it just keeps going 7, 7, 7.
Right.
After that. There are also on this particular matter, there's some R's on there and some C's.
Yeah.
The R's mean that the lender has not reported any information during that time. So you can see from April 2019 to November 2019, the lender did not report any information to the Credit Reporting Bureau.
Okay. That is quite technical just to read that. I see now what you're saying. The letters indicate the start of the month.
Yes. Yeah. And the C's at the end is for when the account was closed. So this account is recording information from March 2018 to April 2020. This account that this person had closed in February of 2020.
Right.
Now, it only ever records information for 2 years. So if we were looking at this account in October of this year, then what it would show was from November in 2019 to 2018 to October 2020. And then it would just keep showing C's, and it would start at that one there in 2018 November.
Right.
All those other things would have dropped off.
Mm.
Now, can you keep an eye on those questions, Ellen? Because I can't read that.
That's all right. It's very small writing.
Nothing that I need to look at now.
Somebody's asked, what if I've paid off a 2-year loan in 6 months? Why will the bank not remove the inquiry from my credit report in spite of requesting them ban is CBA?
Because information, and I'll speak a little bit about information on your credit report, it stays on there for, those inquiries stay on there for 2 years, even if you've paid it off. It will show on here that you had a loan with the CBA, it was closed on that particular date.
Right.
This information also stays on there for 2 years.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the other question that I was asked is if you've paid out your loan early in the lumps, or paid out your loan, and you've asked for a reduced sum settlement. So say you owed $1,000 still, you offered the bank or the lender $500. Would it be reflected on your credit report? Now, not in relation to this report, because I don't think they should. However, if there was a default and it was paid out, but not paid out in full, it would be recorded as settled rather than paid out in full. And that does make a difference to your ability to get credit, but I don't think it should be recorded in here. There's only specific information that they're able to record. It doesn't say how it was paid at the end. It just says when the close date was.
Right. Okay.
But I am looking into that a bit further.
Yeah. Somebody's also just asked us in the questions, is there a legend or a guide on how to decipher this repayment history information?
If on the Equifax report, there is a ledger right at the end of the report. I think it was at the end of the report that actually showed what the R's and C's meant, what the so it did sort of explain what it meant. But it is quite complex. I suppose that's why people are interested in this topic, because it will take a bit of time to get into your brain. It's taken me like years and years, and I still know if I've got it completely.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Okay, so the one thing that you have to remember is that they can only record repayment history information if you're more than 14 days late.
Okay.
So that was good old Alan Jones. That's the Alan Jones amendment to this legislation, because originally they wanted to show mispayment if you were even a day late.
Oh, okay.
And we did think that was quite unreasonable, because people should be given some notice, and you have to be sent a notice as well. Okay. All right. Treatment of hardship. This is about how hardship is treated on your credit report. And there's two different ways. There's one, where's it reflected in the repayment history information? How's it reflected in defaults, if defaults are listed? And how's it reflected during the COVID-19 response? I think that's the way to
A lot of people asked about that. Are banks more sympathetic at the moment towards people in their credit reports?
Well, they are. So banks have made some special arrangements as to how they'll respond to listings on credit reports, particularly repayment history information, which I'll talk about their specific requirements or what they're going to do in a minute. The other thing though too is the question was even broader than that. It was saying how empathetic are they generally. What I would do is go, if anyone's interested, go to the Australian Bankers Association homepage or each of the individual banks. They have all got COVID-19 responses, and some of
Yeah.
them are very good, and there is some variation between the banks.
Okay.
But can I just say that in relation to credit reporting, the COVID-19 responses are only in relation to banks.
So not other types of loans.
Lenders, not other types of lenders. So the loans, all loans given by banks will have the same thing applied, but not other lenders.
Okay.
The treatment of hardship. So this is a very tricky area in relation to repayment history information, because our view, and this is the consumers' movement's view, is that once you've made a hardship request and it's granted, if you were behind on payments, so can we slide back to that slide? No, let's go back in further. So let's just say in August, in March of 2018, we knew that we were going to be in trouble with our payments.
Okay.
We went off to the bank and said, listen, we're not going to be able to, in May of 2018, we're not going to be able to make the payment in June.
Okay.
And the bank said, okay, we'll give you a hardship variation for however many months, 4 months or 3 months.
Yeah.
Our view is that at that time, straight away, your repayment history information, whilst you're meeting that hardship request, should be 0, 0, 0, 0. That has not been the attitude of lenders, and lenders have had all sorts of ways of recording repayment history information if there's been a hardship request. One of the general ways, though, because it's all got too hard, is that a lot of lenders simply don't record it at all. Some lenders will record it as a 0, and other lenders will say, well, the payments are still overdue, we'll record it as a 1, 2, 3, or however long the variation lasts for, and then when they go back to normal payments and they're meeting those, will go back to 0. So there's a whole variety of the way that that's been treated. There is legislation at the moment, and the reason for originally even talking about credit reporting was to talk about the new proposed legislation, and that will mean that with the new proposed legislation, there will be a hardship flag put onto somebody's credit report.
Okay.
So it's clear that the person has made a hardship request, and but it will only be, hardship flags will only be on credit reports where they are also collecting repayment history information. So it won't be relevant to utilities, telephone and electricity accounts. I know it's complicated.
It seems like there's a lot of exceptions to the general.
Yeah, well, we don't want them in there. The other thing is that credit reporting bodies can't use the hardship flags to generate credit scores. So somebody asked, how will hardship arrangements be affected? How will they affect your credit score?
Yeah.
Well, they won't, because they can't use them when they're generating a credit score. The lenders argue that if you have a hardship flag on these, it will allow them to make better lending decisions. And you might think, well, that's very sensible. Do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought that. The problem, though, is that the problem from the consumers movement is that people are very sensitive about financial information, as you know. Do you really want something that's publicly available? Maybe not so publicly available, but available to a lot of people that says you're in hardship.
No, of course not.
Of course not. So our concern is that will that stop people seeking hardship variations early? The other concern is, instead of getting hardship, will you go off to some dodgy lender and get the money so that you won't have to make the payment? And And the other thing is that, will it be a mechanism for some lenders increasing the interest rate on other lending that you have if they see that you're in hardship? Don't think that it doesn't happen, because we know that there is differential interest rates. So there's a big concern about these hardship flags. And the other thing is, for some loans, in fact, if you're in hardship, it's a default on other loans.
Yeah, right.
So they can call up the principal. So it's a very sensitive subject, hardship flags. They're not in place yet. So it will very much depend on individual lenders' response as to how they're recorded in repayment hardship information. And I really do think people should get legal advice then. If they're concerned about how it's being recorded and they've got a hardship arrangement, until this new legislation is in, get some legal advice. And I'll talk a little bit more about complaints and how to go and do these complaints. Oh, look, there's a question. I've just picked one out. Do paid aid lenders really look at your credit report? Only if they're subscribers. So not all paid aid lenders are members of the credit reporting body. So they may not look at your credit reporting body. Credit report. So let's go back to our hardship slide. So defaults, well, you're not in default. They can't list a default while they're in the process of determining a hardship request. So if you've got in before, so defaults, and I'll talk a little bit about defaults later on. You're probably thinking, what's the difference between repayment history information and defaults? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Well, you've got to ask these questions.
I don't have a background in finance, so but I'm learning a lot. Thank you, Loretta.
You've just got to ask that question, because I in some senses, because some of the audience may not know that there's a difference between defaults and repayment history information. But I will go into that. Defaults, I'll talk just about the treatment of hardship, and then I'll talk about defaults a little bit later on when they're listed. They're much more serious than having one missed payment on your repayment history information. But you can't list it. So if you're in trouble, you go to your lender and a default hasn't been listed, and you say, I want a hardship variation. They grant it to you. No default listed. They can't list you as defaulting whilst they're processing that request up. Let's say you go to the lender and they say, no, Ellen, we're not going to give you that hardship request. And you're behind on your repayments. We're about to list a default.
And I'm terribly sad and upset.
Yes. Well, it's regardless. They can't then list until 14 days after that date. But you can do some stuff about hardship, but I'll talk which you might be able to go off to an ombudsman scheme or whatever, which would then further delay the listing of the default. So what's the banks doing in terms of the treatment of hardship during COVID? So what they have decided to do is that they will, so if we go back to that, can we go back to that slide on? So we're back here with this repayment history information. So if you were in default before COVID-19 and you then went to you'd missed a payment, not in default, but you'd missed a payment. And you went to the bank and then said, can we get a deferral on the basis of, we're in hardship now because of COVID-19. What the banks would do is then list it as an R, in that they wouldn't provide any information to the credit reporting body. So let's say in February of 2020, your account was still opened. You went to I think maybe the banks had their response in March. You went in March. You went in March, you already had a 1 in February. You went in March and said, can you please give me a deferral on the basis of, I'm struggling because I've lost my job. They would simply from then on only list they wouldn't give any information to the credit reporting body, and your credit report would say for those 6 months. If you weren't in default, so if in March of 2020 you were still up to date and you then went to the bank and said, I'm struggling with this, how do I pay? Or, you know, I want a deferment. They would, and they granted it to you, they would list you as not being behind, so 0.
Okay.
That's the way that they've decided to deal with credit reporting during the COVID-19 response. However, can I just say, we don't know what the bank's response will be afterwards. I think that they are trying to work out how they will respond, and I'm sure we'll get an update at some time. The banks can't go, so after the 6 months deferment, they can't go straight to a default vote, because what I mean, they could, so after the 6 months is over, and you were out of the hardship.
Yeah, so you got your job back or something like that?
No, or you didn't have a hardship arrangement anymore.
Okay.
But you were still struggling.
Okay.
Then the month after that, they could presumably list you as a 1, as a missed payment.
Okay.
Could they list you as a default? No, because you're not in default. And I'll talk about that, about being in default. Because up until that stage, you had an arrangement.
Yeah.
So, and you have to be in default for 60 days before they can list.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing, the only thing that I wanted to answer a question about, which was asked, and which is my biggest concern about people asking for deferral of mortgage payments during this time, and it's not related to credit reporting, is that during that period of time, the interest on the account still continues to accumulate. And so therefore you might end up after the 6 months owing more, or you will, than what you went in before, especially if you've deferred payments.
So that's a little bit of a danger with getting a mortgage deferral during this time for people.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I can't hear you, Linda.
She can hear us now.
Okay.
It was on her end.
Okay. So let's go forward a bit more. I'm starting to lose my voice, Ellen.
Default information.
Oh God, one of the questions is really fascinating, but I'll see if we can answer it at the end.
Thank you for submitting your questions, everyone. They're really great, and it's good to see that people are listening and paying attention. So the default information, it's really, so you can have missed payment information. You can also have a default listed on your credit report. Yeah.
And that's before default can be listed. That's what criteria has to be met. Most importantly, the default has to be more than $150. The missed payment information can be, well, a credit card payment could be $26 or $25. It could be treated as a missed payment. But for default, you have to be at least in
over $150. Okay.
So, and the credit provider can't wait more than 3 months after they've provided you with the second notice to list a default. And that was so that what was happening in the past is that sometimes they would wait 2 or 3 years to list a default. And because default information is on your credit report for 5 years, it could affect your ability to get credit for a period of 8 years. So there is a requirement that they must list within 3 months after issuing you with the second notice. However, that still causes problems because there isn't an actual legislative requirement, as far as I'm aware, to how long after the first notice do you have to give the second notice. You have to wait at least 30 days. And this is again where that code I was talking about at the start, the industry code, which is the Principles of Reciprocity and Data Exchange Code, that in itself only has that it needs to be a reasonable time frame. What's reasonable?
What is reasonable? That is such lawyer lingo, isn't it? A reasonable time frame.
Yeah, so it should really be dealt with in that code. And it was a particular question that was asked of me, so I wanted to answer it that is something that we don't want people to be able to wait too long before a default is listed if they're going to list the default. The other question that was asked is, do credit providers have to wait 180 days to put a default or send to a debt collector? I'm not entirely sure what that question was about, but I'm assuming either it might have something to do with the COVID response, or it might have something to do with just generally how long do they wait. It's really up to a credit provider as to how long they wait before they send it off to a debt collector. A debt collector, really, they can put it into their own debt collection section as short as possible or as long as possible. Sometimes they wait years. You can only put in a default. You have to be overdue for at least 60 days, not 180 days, 60 days.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, if you send the notice about the overdue payment, and then it's 60 days, 30 days, and 14 days is the shortest period of time after which you could list a default. But other than that, there's no requirement for them to list, to wait 60 days. There's also something called a serious credit infringement, which is really about those people who disappear and can't be found.
Okay, yeah.
But if you're found, it needs to be removed.
Okay.
So if you've disappeared, then and you come back on the scene, like you've moved without telling the credit provider, they've listed you, you come back on the scene, then that has to be removed because you're no longer trying to avoid your obligations to creditors.
Okay.
It's really about that.
Yeah.
It's a very serious thing to have on your credit report, so you do want to get it off.
So after 7 years, you can get it off.
It will come off automatically, but if the basis on which it was put on there is that you've disappeared, so you moved house and you didn't let the credit provider know, and then 6 months later you pop up again and say, I'm here, I want to make an arrangement to pay, that has to be removed because you're no longer trying to avoid your obligations. And then I'm just going to gloss over this because we're already
Yes, we've got 15 minutes left. We might spend an extra 5 to 10 minutes at the end to go through questions.
So the information that could be on your credit report is publicly available information, and that's really about judgments that are on the report. They must relate to creditworthiness. So one of the things that if there's a judgment on there which you don't think relates to creditworthiness, that is something that you can raise with the Credit Reporting Bureau. Whether they'll take it off or not you can still go off to the Ombudsman. I like to argue that if the judgment doesn't relate to a loan, then you should be able to argue that it should be removed. So an example might be you've been involved in a traffic accident and the other party is suing you for liability. Doesn't relate to your creditworthiness. If a judgment's made against you, then you should be able. Then my view is that you could argue that that's not creditworthiness information. Then commercial credit is any credit that you've applied for that isn't for personal, household, or family purposes. The reason why I put this there is because the laws that cover it are different to the credit reporting laws. So the credit reporting laws in relation to personal credit is very tightly controlled. Commercial credit is generally only is covered by the Australian privacy principles. And that means also that sometimes if there's it may be difficult to get those removed because the companies that have put them on there don't have to be members of an external dispute resolution scheme. Again, if you're worried about that, I would seek some advice. Now, the way that it's most likely to come up to our listeners is some of those companies that are rental companies for cars and trucks in some ways, which should be personal credit, but is seen written as commercial credit. Get advice about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Then,
so what stays on the credit report?
lots. How long does it stay on for? So bankruptcy, court judgment, credit inquiries and default generally 5 years. Repayment history information too. Oh, look, just read it. It's not that. The thing that I wanted to say, I don't need to go through it, but the question that I was asked was about bankruptcy and how long it stays on the credit report. It's only 5 years, but there is the National Personal Insolvency Index, which is a public record, and bankruptcy stay on there for how long do you think?
7 years?
No, it's a life sentence.
Oh.
It stays on there for life.
Okay.
So you can go back and search that register.
Yeah.
And it will show you all the bankruptcies since Federation.
So
all of the famous people that have gone bankrupt will be on there. That though, having said that, that's not a index that generally credit providers will access. All right? So yeah, and if somebody asked me, can a default be removed after 5 years if it's still on there? Yes, it should be. And the other question too is that the other question that I got asked is, how timely should they be? Now, I'm thinking that the credit reporting agencies are pretty good, that it's automatically scrubbed after 5 years. I haven't seen many circumstances where it's still there after 5 years. So.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
Credit scores, what are they? I thought a credit score and a credit report was a similar thing, so I'm interested in this question.
Okay, so because credit scores are really, they can be generated by two entities, really.
Okay.
They can be generated by credit providers and they can be generated by credit reporting bureaus. They generate them from the information that they have about you. And the thing is, when you ask for a credit report that's free, you don't get a copy of your credit score.
Okay, yeah.
Because credit scores are really something that the credit reporting companies say is information that is something that's commercially their own product.
Oh, okay? I see. And it's not for public viewing?
Well, it is for public viewing, but it's not public, it's not information that they're required to give access to for free.
Right, okay.
So only you can get access to your credit report for free in certain circumstances, and I'll go a little bit into that as well. So they can be generated by credit providers and credit reporting bureaus. The reason that they're important, well, they're not important in terms of if you've fixed up all your errors on your credit report, then your credit score will reflect that. You can't change your credit score as such. All you can do is change the underlying information.
Okay, yes.
So when people ask how accurate the credit scores, well,
it depends how accurate your credit report
is because it's just derived from your credit report as to what information, what information is in there. So really, the best. So the other thing that I got asked is, so you can access your credit report for free once a year, or within 90 days of a refusal, or if after you've corrected something.
And where can I go to get my credit report?
So you can go to each of those credit reporting agencies that I talked about at the start.
The three of them.
Experian or Equifax. Equifax is still the biggest one. All right.
That's the only name I recognise, to be honest.
Yes. So I generally would go there. Yeah. I generally go there if I'm helping a client to try and work out what's going on. The other thing that the advice should be go to all three, but that's too complicated for people. The other thing is, yes, you could, as a representative, get a copy of the credit report, but I find on a practical basis, it's just much easier for clients to apply themselves.
Okay, so our community workers should be telling clients to go to these themselves.
Yeah, and and often you can walk them through the form as well.
Yeah.
The form isn't that difficult online.
Yeah.
The problem is there are still a few clients that
Mhm.
don't have any access to online facilities, and you need an email address.
Okay.
So that's a bit
That's
tricky.
a barrier for people sometimes.
Absolutely, and especially a barrier during this time because they can't even go anywhere to print anything or do those sorts of things. So I think.
So what do you recommend people do in that case?
Get some legal advice as to how they can do it. You can just go to. So that's the thing. You can go to the website. It tells you what you need to do if you're going to write to them. But if they've gone to a community worker, you should be able to look it up online as to what the process is. The problem is that most of the community workers won't necessarily be seeing people face to face either, which makes it really difficult. That's about it that I had for.
Yeah, so we might move on to questions now, and some of you have typed in some great questions into the box. So shall we go through those ones first?
Can I just do one other thing? Yeah. Is that there was some questions asked about where you can complain to. So the complaints first should go to the credit provider or the credit reporting body, depending on the nature of the complaint. And if it's not resolved, then to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, and that's www.afca.org.au. You can also ask for temporary stop on your credit report. That's particularly useful if they've been, that they've been a victim of fraud or they gambling and they don't want to be able to get credit. So you can ask for a temporary stop. And I just was speaking to somebody the other day who's put in a number of stops because they're time limited. Don't ask me what time because I can't remember.
All right.
But you can ask for repeat. So if the time runs out, you can ask for an extra period of time as well. Yeah. Okay. Hit me with those questions.
Okay. I'll go up to the top. We've got so many questions. Okay. What about this one? What about if the debt is sold to a debt collection agency? Is that a new entry on the credit report?
It shouldn't be. So if it relates to default, so it depends. If it's a default, then once that default's been listed, it can't be relisted. So if you've had somebody who 4 years ago had a default and didn't make any more payments and it got sold off to a debt collection company, they can't relist the same default. Okay, so they can update the default to say it's now being managed by or it's now owned by this company, but they can't put a new default in based on the same event. No.
Okay. Yeah. So someone else has asked, how long do defaults remain on a credit report, and when does the time frame commence for counting this time frame?
As soon as it goes on, and it's 5 years. So it's not from the date of the. It's from the date that the listing's made, not the date of the actual default.
Right. Yeah. Somebody's also asked a bit of a jurisdictional question: is the credit reporting system the same in the US?
Absolutely not, but who knows? Who knows what they're doing there? But look, one of the things is that the comprehensive credit reporting that we now do, the more information that's on, does come from that sort of comprehensive system in the US, but it's very different and we're much more limited. Okay. But there is a real push. That's why there's a real push by the industry to generate these credit scores and to give people anxiety that they must know what their credit score is. They don't need it. Okay.
Yeah. Someone's asked, do payday lenders really look at your credit report? Do they care?
I think I answered that before, but they don't have to. And a lot of them may or may not be a member. No. So if they're wanting to assess responsible lending, I think that they should look at the credit report because it will show other lending. The problem is because the credit reporting system is expensive and these loans are very small amount loans, that they may not actually be a member, subscribe to any of these credit reporting bureaus, and therefore they won't be adding information or will not be able to access information. So that is a problem it's not necessarily the case that they will be accessing. But if they are a member, I think that they should, as part of their responsible lending obligations, yes.
Okay. So someone said, this must be in relation to a slide that we were on before. Is this the case now or in the future with the new legislation? You cannot use hardship to work out the credit score.
So yes, that will be in relation to the new legislation. At the moment, because hardship isn't reported as such. There are no hardship flags on credit reports. So this only relates to new information, the new legislation.
Okay.
However, the credit provider themselves, if they're generating a score and they've basing it on the information that they've got within their own systems to assess, you've gone back to your own bank, they may take it into account. I'm not sure how they do it at the moment.
Okay. So keep submitting your questions. It's really great when you interact with us. So let us know if you've got any burning questions.
Look, this question about capitalising the interest. So the question was...
A couple of people have asked this.
Yes. Since the nation is financially affected by COVID, especially in the space of mortgages, if the banks genuinely want to come through for their customers, why capitalise the interest? Absolutely agree, or at least give much better, clearer understanding to people that yes, they will provide a deferment, but this will be the consequences if you accept the deferment, that, you know, interest will be capitalised. I mean, that's my understanding of the law, that banks may make some concessions about that, but I haven't heard of it. If anyone else has, please.
Yeah, please let us know in the comments. Does that mean that an account needs to be 104 days overdue before it can be listed as a default?
Gee, that's very specific. So yes, in that sense, you first have to be 60 days in default. Then a notice has to be sent out and you have to at least have the 30 days. So that takes it to 90. And then you can only list after the 14 days, so 104 days. Exactly right. But, you know, generally speaking, it would be longer than that anyway, given that they're not going to often, you know, straight away go as soon as that they can. Yeah. How long do judgments stay in your credit report? 5 years. So,
if you want to,
how do you spell those providers? Do you have their names listed on the slide? No.
We will put that information in the email that we send out after this with the PowerPoint slide.
Yeah.
We'll put some handy links for you all on there. If you want to put a block on credit providers, who do you request this from, and do you do it in writing?
What do you mean? I'm not. If you want to put a block on credit provision, who do you do? So it's not really credit provision. What you're doing is putting a block on your credit report. So that means basically you go and approach the credit reporting agency, and what they'll do is that they won't release that information to anyone. So, and the chances then of you getting credit are pretty zero. If you apply to a bank and the bank goes off to the credit reporting agency and says, we want, you know, a copy of the person's credit report, and they say, well, we're not making it available at that time, that basically kills your chance of getting getting credit. That's the way it operates in practice.
Yeah. So someone says, is it really your experience that credit providers don't check the bankruptcy register?
Well, I can't say for sure.
Okay.
And there is, and I always say to people, the problem with, particularly when you applications for credit, often they will ask, have you ever been bankrupt?
Yeah.
Or had a judgment made against you? So you know, and you have an obligation to answer that question honestly. So in a sense, yes, it comes off your credit report, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not obliged to answer questions about it, or it definitely is on that National Personal Insolvency Index.
Okay. Should we answer this one? If you were working for a government agency, for example, ASIO, would credit listings be listed on your file?
I'm not sure what the question is asking there. I'm not sure what the question is asking.
That's all right. We might email this worker
and see what
they have.
All right, is that it? Have I done them all?
Oh, here comes another question. Another 2 questions. Okay, so this question's about, so banks are offsetting the interest being capitalised. Capitalised unpaid interest is added on the principal of the loan. CBA notes that interest and fees will be added to your loan during the repayment pause. However, the bank announcement that it would make a one-off payment to customers to cover the amount of interest that would be paid on the interest accrued during the 6-month break.
Wow. Well, that's why I'm suggesting to people that they do go and have a look at the individual COVID responses from each of the lender to see what they will do in relation to the COVID-19 response, because that's a pretty great response if you're with the CBA.
Yeah.
So
somebody says they've heard from clients about encouraging their children to obtain credit so that they have a credit score. It seems to be very important to have a credit score to then obtain future credit. Does this hold true?
No. There is information that, one, because credit scores are not what determines whether you get credit or not. It's actually it is that simply they create that score from information that's derived in your credit report. So it depends what's in your credit report. Now, there's all sorts of information that they take into account as to whether whether it increases your ability to get credit or not. So there are things like, you know, if you had an electricity account and you've paid it in accordance with its terms or whatever, of course that is seen as adding to your creditworthiness, but it's not the sort of thing that you get a credit score or a credit report based on not having any credit at all. So if you went and applied, if you were an 18-year-old and applied for your first credit card, they would look at your addresses, your employment, the information that's on there. They would look at any other information in determining whether you should get credit. If you've got a credit card and you haven't paid for it, it's going to be far worse in terms of your ability to get credit than not having any information about on there at all about you having had credit in the past.
That is a good point.
Can you remove a default listed in error? Yes, but that's, again, you have to go through the complaints process by accessing either, you know, first the lender and then the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. Just to clarify, mispayments of utilities don't contribute to credit score. Will it affect anything on the credit report? So if you are in default on a utilities account.
Yeah.
So it's more than 60 days, they can list a default.
Yeah.
They cannot, though, they are not ones that report repayment history information. So there's no zero, there's nothing. It's just that basic information about when the account was opened, closed, and what sort of an account type it is. If does it affect your credit score? Well, it can't, because it's not on your credit report at all. And your credit score is derived from information that's on your credit report. So I couldn't see how it could possibly affect your credit score.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Would you like to answer?
If someone is in default and pays it out, is the default removed or just updated to settle? I thought I answered this question, but I just shows you that I'm not as clear as I thought, Ellen.
Thank you for asking these questions.
Yes, please ask, because it makes my job a lot easier. If someone is in default and says it pays it out, that means it will only be, if they pay it out in full, it's noted as paid in full, it's not removed. If they only partially pay it and there's a settlement, it's noted as settled. The problem with paid defaults is that it really doesn't make it much easier to get credit. A default is seen as a very serious impact on your ability to get credit.
Okay.
Until it's removed.
Yeah. Someone says, can you complain to OAIC? Are awards for non-financial loss higher?
Look, technically you can still complain to the OAIC, but they do get you to go to AFCA first. I'm not sure how well resourced they are. The reason why I was grateful that people started to have access to AFCA was I once ran a case, and after 8 years they said they couldn't do anything. So it wasn't a really good system to go through, and that's because the OAIC, not the OAIC, but its predecessor, named the Privacy Commissioner, really their job is to regulate the industry. And, in the dealing of individual complaints, it is a really good idea that there is someone like AFCA there.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying about non-financial loss, because especially about privacy breaches. So look, I would always, it depends on the individual circumstances. Really, I'd get some advice about it. But generally speaking, I'm quite in favour of going to AFCA, even though it has, the limits on non-financial loss are relatively low.
Yeah, someone's asking specifically about mobile phone contracts. Does that contribute to credit scores?
Well, it can, in that sense that if you had 6 mobile phone contracts, it may very well affect your, how creditworthy you are. And if you defaulted on payments, obviously it would be a default.
Yeah.
It's not, it depends. Your ability to get credit and the basis on which people make lending decisions is about all the information that's on your credit report. So, like I said to you, even inquiries to more dodgier lenders will affect your ability to get credit.
Yeah.
So, of course, if you have 6 mobile phone contracts, that already adds to, well, can you afford this other loan that you're asking for?
Yeah.
It also might mean is that it depends on if you have defaults on any of those. Of course, that will affect your ability to obtain credit. And the questions keep coming.
Yeah, so are you able to go over how hardship arrangements will be reported on credit reports during COVID-19 again?
Okay, just very quickly. So it only applies to banks.
Yeah.
if you were up to date when they brought the arrangements in and you asked for deferment, the way it will be reported is 0. So it means that you're up to date with your payments during that 6-month period. If you were not up to date but asked for deferment based on COVID-19, it will just show on that repayment history information as an R. That's for each of the products that the bank gives, so credit cards, personal loans, and mortgages. It will, but it only relates to banks. Hope that helps.
And we will put this recording up on YouTube afterwards, so you can always watch it again.
And I think I'm going to miss that last question. What is the AFCA approach to financial hardship and RHI? I know who sent that. That's a really difficult question to go and answer in this period of time. And I'm not sure actually, because we haven't sent so many complaints to AFCA about this.
Okay. Someone's asking how many credit applications inquiries listed over what period of time would be negative on your credit report? Is there some kind of rule about how many?
There isn't a rule, but you know, the more you have and the type you have, the greater the effect. The other thing was, there was one question that was asked about a credit provider accessing a person's file 75 times. I would be looking for some advice about that, because there is an ability to access a file for credit management purposes, but is it reasonable to do it 75 times?
It doesn't seem like it, unless that was done in error.
No, I agree. You covered there. What about the customer? That's true. So we covered the ABI approach to RHI and COVID-19, but what about the customer-owned banks, so the credit unions? I'm not sure. I think we should respond in writing to that.
Okay, to this question we'll respond.
We'll put it into the email. And we'll refer people to the customer-owned banks, because you are right that there is a different approach from the Australian Banking Association members to the customer-owned banks that may have a different approach.
Yes, okay. So stay tuned to your emails. So if that's all the questions today, we might wrap it up a little bit. I've got some important information about Legal Aid's COVID-19 response, which I want to get to on the next slide. So thank you everyone so much for your questions. If you have any more questions, send them through to me at webinars@legalaid.qld.gov.au, and I can field them to Loretta as well. Okay, so in terms of how Legal Aid is helping clients at the moment, our contact centre is still open Monday to Friday, 9 AM to 4 PM. So you can call us on that number on the screen. If your clients need it, they can still book in to visit one of our 13 offices, but we just recommend people call before coming in. So we're still assessing grants of aid. One of the biggest impacts to our service has been obviously duty lawyers. So if your client needs to see a criminal law duty lawyer, family law duty lawyer, domestic violence duty lawyer, please call ahead and book in ideally 3 days before. So there's the numbers on the screen there. And of course, if you're under 18, if your client's under 18, you can call our Youth Legal Aid hotline on 1800 527 527. So if you want to keep up to date with the announcements, please visit our Legal Aid website, where we post announcements regularly about what's happening. So those are our office locations if you are interested. Now, if you'd like to stay up to date with our webinar program, please visit our Information for Community Workers and Carers page on our website. We included that link in the email that you all got sent when you registered for this webinar, but I'll send you the link again when I send you all the PowerPoint slides. So we post upcoming webinars on there, and there's also heaps of other information. You might want to go through our webinars on demand on our YouTube channel. So we've got a bunch of webinars up there now with closed captions as well. over the past 12 months, all different topics as well, not just consumer law. We're also, during COVID, doing a lot more on social media with legal information. So we're providing little bite-sized chunks of legal information on our social media accounts. So there's a couple of examples on the screen of the kind of information we're providing. It's really helpful to you, I think, as community workers, because you can just log on, you can have a scroll through and just get some like quick little bites of information, and then you can see a little bit more about the services Legal Aid offers. And another thing a lot of people don't know about is that you can actually order our publications, and we've got so many publications on different legal topics, and you can get them for free, and you can order them straight to your office. So to order or view publications, go to our website. And if you want to find out more about the law, of course, visit www.legalaid.purely.gov.au, and there's lots of sections there with content on different legal topics. So thank you so much to everyone who came today.